So welcome to this panel about multicarrier waveforms, a success story on the way towards 16. And let me first of all, let me perhaps introduce myself. My name is Garcia. I work in Madrid, Spain. And it is my pleasure to moderate this panel. And the aim of this panel is, first of all, to commemorate the important achievement, this award that if you were in the awards luncheon right now, I don't need to maybe repeat, but just in case, this award that has been given to 3 of our distinguished COMSOC members, Steve Weinstein here, Leonard, Cimini connected online, and Geoffrey that couldn't make it, for their fundamental contributions to frequency domain communications, including OFDM. And I really think OFDM is a very important success of all our community. So I thought it was about time to recognize their success and our success. And also have a little bit of a historical point of view and understand what led us here and how we can learn for the future. And for that, we have amazing panelists that, as I mentioned, one of them is going to be connecting remotely, and the others are here with me. And I'm going to just introduce them briefly because, well, most of them are very well known to all of you. So I'm going to go in the order that later they will be doing their presentations. That is going to be a little bit in a historical, chronological ordering of what happened with OFDM. So first, we have Stephen Weinstein. He is now an independent consultant retired. He's a life fellow of IEEE. And I'm going to summarize, right? He conducted very early research on OFDM. And he authored some important publications that are reference for all of us. And he has received many awards. And he also has developed many important roles in IEEE and in particular in COMSOC. And he was the COMSOC president. So, well, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we can. Second, we have Len Cimini that was planning to come, but at the very last moment he cannot. So he is remote, and I'm not sure he can hear me, but I'm going to bring my laptop closer so he can hear me better. So, Len has also conducted very important early work on OFDM when he was at ATT, first the laboratories and then ATT laboratories. And he's also an IEEE fellow for his contributions to the theory and practice of high-speed wireless communications. And he has been a pioneer in the work in OFDM, receiving also many awards. And he's here, but thank you also for joining us online. Then we have Katie Wilson. She's also a fellow of IEEE, and also she worked both in industry and academia, also quite early in OFDM, in many places where OFDM was actually happening. She was, I think, everywhere where it was needed to be, like in Sweden, in Stanford, in so many places. And she has received many awards also from IEEE and COMSOC. She also developed very important roles in COMSOC, like director of journals, vice president of publications. I think she was probably the first female vice president in COMSOC. I would say yes.
Maybe Celia.
Yeah, and we only have 3. Counting me. Yes. And she also received many awards. So thank you, Katie. Also. Then we have Hikmet. Sari, he is going to bring us a little bit the European perspective because he's now a professor at Nanjing University, but he developed most of his career in France, where he was a professor and department head at Supélec near Paris. And he is also an IEEE fellow for his contributions in digital microwave radio systems. He worked a lot in OFDM, OFDMA, single carrier, frequency domain equalization, giving birth to all that we have today. And he has also many, many awards. Thank you. And last but not least, we wanted also a perspective of someone a bit younger. So talking a little bit about the future, not only about the past. I'm not saying that we are old, but maybe a little bit. So Jinhong Yuan, he was a research fellow at the School of Electrical Engineering at Sydney, Australia, and he's now in New South Wales University in Sydney, Australia. And he has also published a lot of works about the topics we are going to discuss. And he has several best paper awards, and he also has important editorial roles in ComSoc. So thank you, Jinhong. And next, let's go for the panel, right? So the first, let me tell you that I have asked all the panelists to tell us things that we cannot read on the paper. So this is something special. We have them here today, and they're going to tell us things that we cannot know if we are not here. So we are privileged to be here. And first I wanted them to tell us a little bit about their experience. So I just put some questions, but they are free to answer whatever they want, about what perhaps was the most difficult at the early days of OFDM, which was the most important milestone in the development until present, what was their first experience with OFDM, how and when they started working on this, and they are going to just tell us a little bit about the story.
All right, so first I want to tell you about this picture of me that Anna showed where I was wearing glasses. And I just want to reassure all you young people that when you get to be old people, there can be actually some improvement in your body after cataract surgery. All right, so this is going to be kind of my personal view of the early history. It's certainly not the complete story of OFDM, but just some observations, especially about how I got into it. So how did people get into a subject area 50 years ago? Probably the same way they do today. There's some mentor type person who kind of helps you get into it. In this case, I was working in Bob Lucky's department at Bell Labs in Holmdel. I began there in 1968. So this, he would conduct a series of Friday afternoon sessions, or any idea could pop up, and people would discuss their thoughts and where they thought the world of technology was going. So sometime in 1969, he talked about this recently published article about a fast, computationally efficient way of doing the discrete Fourier transform. And Cooley and Tukey were professors at Harvard, as I remember, who introduced their version of the fast Fourier transform. So he asked if anybody wanted to look into possible applications in modems, which was the work area of his department. In fact, the main project at that time, this was something very advanced, was a 9600 bit per second modem. That was the front line of technology. So there's a reference for the Cooley-Tukey algorithm if you want to see it. Bob was quite a leader. He sort of let people express themselves and followed their instincts and didn't interfere too much even when he thought we weren't doing the right thing. It's very interesting that it was later reported that that algorithm or something very close to it had been invented in 1805 by Carl Friedrich Gauss. And there's a reference there. If anybody wants to try looking it up. I think I once tried and couldn't read it. That's another story. So what I did is I rediscovered that digital data could be transformed into an overlapping but orthogonal harmonic set of harmonic frequency subband signals through use of the DFT. That wasn't any new discovery, just for me. my main claim to fame is just suggesting, as Bob Lucky had urged us to consider, that this could be applied to generating modem signals. And it would be an alternative to having, a series of modulators. This would be a software way of generating a multi-frequency waveform. So I first worked with my direct boss, Jack Saltz. I was a member of technical staff, and he was first layer of management above me. And he was a wonderful analyst, really very sharp. I could never really do the deeply analytical stuff. I had some ideas, but I needed somebody like him to help bring them to fruition. So he did, and he worked with me, and we published this little article in an extremely obscure ACM conference in the backwoods of Georgia. I remember driving past fields with people sitting on porches and rocking chairs. It was sort of the old Georgia. So that was the first time we brought out something. Then my colleague, we shared an office actually, Paul Ebert, also a brilliant analyst, developed the concept further, and especially how it might perform in distorted channels and how to equalize them. By the way, if it's just a linear channel, the equalization is very simple. Essentially, it's multiplying a complex number by the signal of each channel. I think people have since found that doing things in the frequency domain or in the time domain, if you're clever enough in both those domains, they involve about the same amount of computational complexity. But this was sort of a cool thing to consider, generating a multi-tone signal on a computer. Paul Ebert, by the way, I wish I had a better picture of him. I've lost track of him for some time now. That was a photograph taken from our paper, at the end of the paper. He went on to become a very influential contributor to the safety of air traffic control. Now, I think Len's going to say something similar. At that time, Bell Labs wasn't interested in this area. We were using QAM for our high-speed modem, which I think I mentioned was a 9600 bit per second modem. And nobody was interested in an OFDM system, and in particular, they didn't even bother to patent it. So where did OFDM come from? It certainly didn't start with me. It comes from a long history of development of frequency. I'm sorry, yes?
Yes, Steve. So did your 1972 paper have the idea of the cyclic prefix in it, or did that come along at a later time?
That came along at a later time. Yeah, we weren't. Many things came along at a later time. So actually the history began of FDM began in the 19th century. And one of the main things that happened actually was done by Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell was interested in ways to help people who were deaf. He was interested in speech. He wasn't much interested in telegraphy. However, his father-in-law and a group of associates of his father-in-law were his backers. They were financing him, and they said, okay, you can work on a telephone sometime, but mainly what we want you to try and do is increase the capacity of telegraphy systems. So he developed something called the harmonic telegraphy, which is kind of primitive digital FDM, in order to carry multiple telegraphy sessions on one transmission line. They had tone generators and tone sensors at the sending and receiving ends. And this actually was patented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1875. So if you're looking at FDM, it goes back at least to 1875. Analog FDM came later, but not all that much later. There is, I believe, a 5 sub-channel system implemented or deployed by the Bell system in 1918. And to the best of my knowledge and understanding, they had, independent hardware modulators for each of these subcarrier channels. The big event in my mind in the development of OFDM was this system, which was described by Zimmerman and Kirsch in a 1965 paper. I think most of the work was done in 1960 and 61. They were interested in high frequency radio with multiple subchannels to get around narrow channel fading and noise. They motivated this device they called the Catherine 34 subchannel OFDM communication system in the 1960s. And this was truly OFDM, very narrow channels. They actually used the discrete Fourier transform in an analog hardware implementation. So they didn't have a fast computational way, but they certainly had the whole OFDM idea and actually deployed it. And in my opinion, if they had used the fast Fourier transform, maybe borrowed from Gauss or somebody like that, they would probably get the most credit today for the invention of OFDM modulation. Other major contributors who came before me to OFDM, Bob Chang developed conditions for the shapes of the received pulses for an OFDM system, quote, without interchannel and intersymbol interference. And I should have a citation for his paper. I'm sorry I left it out. Mistake. Bob Chang, I could tell you an anecdote about him and about some of the problems we sometimes faced at the labs. He had the idea for a statistical multiplexer to take a number of modem signals and put them together and send them over one transmission line. And he got kind of minimal support from management. This was at Bell Labs in the early 70s. And he actually prototyped it on some small computer at the time, and even developed a marketing plan that looked forward 10 or 15 years. It's really a brilliant piece of work, and AT&T marketing came back and said, well, this is a brilliant piece of work, but we've seen no demand for a device at this time. Of course not. Nobody ever heard of doing that kind of statistical multiplexing. And he left not too long afterwards, but a lot of things were done at Bell Labs that were not taken up, and maybe we shouldn't fault management because there are just so many things floating around. They certainly couldn't implement everything. But I always felt that he in particular was shortchanged by Bell Labs. Bert Salzberg extended Bob's work to complex data, such as using quadrature amplitude modulation, and investigated performance in a dispersive channel. And further work was done by someone else who was my friend, still is, Otaro Hirosaki. He suggested much faster processing through replacement of the endpoint DFT with a 2-point DFT with appropriate choice of carrier frequency. And he stressed the implementation in digital signal processors. and many other people followed, including people on today's panel. But I just want to once again recognize Geoffrey and Leonard, who were co-recipients with me this morning of the Sumner Award. And we owe them a lot for showing how to really make this useful. So when was the first fast Fourier transform-based OFDM modem developed? Apparently, it was one marketed in the late 70s, and I have just one reference for this to somebody who wrote in after I published a tutorial article on OFDM in 2009 and told me I left something out. And he said what I left out was the Gandalf company's modem that was launched in the late 1970s. I had no contact with it personally, and I assume what he said is true, that they really did have a true OFDM modem on the market. The first large-scale application, I think, was in the discrete multi-tone modem for ADSL that was developed by John Geoffrey, Cimini Corporation, for ASDL applications. So where is OFDM going? Well, I have to tell you frankly, I'm too technically obsolete to even really guess, though I will guess. I think that it's particularly useful for fine-grained allocation of communication resources. And this will be especially important at the intelligent network edge in the future networks, the 6G network in particular, where I think either OFDM or something closely related to it will be used for helping allocate resources dynamically and efficiently in a relatively small area. So that's what I have to say about my observations from the history. I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thanks Anna, and thanks for organizing the panel. Steve did a really good job of going through the history of OFDM, including his seminal contribution. And what I'd like to do is give a short history of how I got involved in OFDM and a few projects that I worked on. And when I talk about it, you'll get the idea right away what I mean by failure. It's similar to Steve's. Okay, so I joined Bell Labs in 1982, April 1982, and I joined the Cellular Systems Engineering Department, which was developing the first cellular system in the United States, which was called AMPS. Think of 1G cellular, you never heard of this before. And I had a PhD in detection and estimation, and I knew just about nothing about mobile radio. So it was an interesting department for me to join. And my job was to work on next generation, second generation cellular, and specifically the modulation. I was instructed in my letter that was sent to me that I should consider multicarrier techniques. And specifically my boss at the time, his name was Phil Porter. Phil Porter told me that I should work on what at the time they were calling subband modulation. And I didn't know anything about anything, and so I was just going to learn about this. And the first day on the job, there was a book on my desk, it's the book to the right, and I was instructed to read it and learn everything I could about mobile radio. This is the edited book by Jakes, mostly written by people from Bell Labs. I don't know if there was anybody else in there. And it was considered sort of the Bible of mobile radio at the time. So brand new PhD, diligent guy, I read the entire book and learned as much as I possibly could. At the same time, I was trying to figure out where the multicarrier techniques part came from. I didn't know much about any of the history of this. And my two people in my group, Nelson Sollenberger and Ken Leland, had heard a talk that Steve mentioned at this point, and they built this modem, this voice band OFDM modem. And from what I understand, it worked very well. And this is where Ken and Nelson got the idea maybe we should look at multicarrier. And so it was pretty clear when I started doing research, this was not new. I was learning about all of the previous work that was done. Steve mentioned the military HF radio. That was critical, the Catherine modem, because lots of people have done multi-carrier before, but theirs is getting really close to the way we do it today. And then there was all the Bell Labs research. And most importantly was Steve's, which is we're applying an FFT to this signal, to generate this signal. So the first thing after I learned a lot, I realized, well, there's a clear advantage in mobile radio for using OFDM because it was going to let us overcome the bitrate limits that delay spread would set. So it like leveled the playing field for us. But whether we can do it, I had no idea. I was brand new. I didn't know how to build anything. I never even thought about it. So the first thing I did, which is a theory person like me would do, is I did a simulation, and the symbol changed because now AT&T had been broken up into a lot of pieces by this point. I did an analysis and simulation for a 7.5 kilohertz channel. AMP channel was 30 kilohertz analog, so this was 4 times the efficiency. And I had a lot of subcarriers, so these were very narrow subchannels that I had here. And the group I worked in was called Exploratory Radio Systems. And Nelson Sollenberger led a group, a part of that group, that constructed a prototype. And it worked pretty well, but the complexity was prohibitive at the time. The DSPs that we had were too slow. We were using internal AT&T DSPs, but it wasn't clear it was anything much faster that we could use at the time. And the FFT, the only way we could implement it was with an array processor that we bought from a military contractor. And my recollection is that it was a pretty large box. And there was just no way this was going to be commercially possible for a while. So because of this, it died a very, very quiet death. It just disappeared, and nobody was interested in internally anymore. AT&T had absolutely no interest. We didn't patent it. I didn't know if you could patent because it wasn't new. I had just found all this research of past stuff, and it wasn't new. And there were a few aspects, maybe channel estimation, the way we did it, but even that wasn't clear. Okay, so, I'm a new, employee here, and early in my career, so what should you do? I didn't want it to just completely die, so I decided to write a paper. I even had to ask permission if it was okay to write a paper, and my boss didn't think it was that important, but I should write the paper. I thought it might be good for my career down the line, but forget about OFDM for the time being. It wasn't going to go anywhere. So this is a very young picture. The only picture I have is of me. This is 28 years old, by the way. And people have seen this paper before. But this paper, to follow the theme that Steve mentioned a little bit, this paper was violently rejected. Not just rejected, but a 6-page handwritten reference that was sent to me. And I said, this is horrible. This is my first paper in Bell Labs. What do I do? I talked to a lot of people. We decided to rebut it, and then eventually it got published. But nobody really paid much attention to it. And it didn't get any citations because people weren't really doing much with OFDM, especially for something like cellular. So I stepped away while I moved to the research organization in AT&T Bell Labs, and I worked on fiber communications for 5 years. But all the time I was there, I kept paying attention to the literature and other stuff, especially the work in OFDM for digital audio and digital video. It seemed very interesting. And I know Hikmet might mention something about this. I haven't seen his slides. And I know Katie will at least mention one very important paper. And I also noticed that I'm slowly getting citations to the paper. And I guess people were now thinking about applying it to digital mobile, and they didn't have any references, so they found mine. And that's how I started to get citations. But what really changed my view was that was with John Chaffee somewhere at a conference maybe, I don't remember, sitting around having beer, probably watching the Bears and the Bulls or the Philadelphia Eagles, I don't remember, but he told me about what he was doing. And I remember him telling me something like 4,096 sub-channels, and I thought that was outrageous. And then he told me what the DSP speeds were like and what you could do processing at, and I was even more shocked. Because I hadn't followed any of that. Fiber communications, we were transmitting gigabits per second. And so I thought that maybe OFDM will have a place one day in cellular, but still didn't give it a whole lot of thought. So this is where my initial interactions, anything with OFDM started and ended. But AT&T in 1991 purchased, merged with NCR, however you want to look at it, and NCR had a small group. NCR was a point of sale company, basically. They have a small group in the Netherlands working on wireless LANs, specifically 1G Wi-Fi. And then when they realized that now they had Bell Labs at their disposal, they asked for help with the next generation system. And they wanted it to be OFDM. And we were very happy to help. And so together, the leader of the group that we interacted with most was Bruce Tuck. But there was a lot of people involved in this in the Netherlands. And together, we proposed a 20 megabit per second system using OFDM. I think it had 64-point FFT, but I don't remember clearly. And it was for a high-speed wireless LAN in Europe, HyperLAN. And we went to the ETSI meetings, and I was not part of the standards body, but I went to the meetings, and people presented. But even though most people seemed to think that OFDM was a really good solution, the proposal failed miserably. And lots of opposition in the standards body. And it was my first experience with the standards body, so I was kind of surprised at the reaction. Even on the last day, we asked to speak. They told us we could speak as long as we didn't talk about OFDM. And my colleague Raji Krishnamurthy got up there with a big slide that had OFDM on it, and he said he would speak about this unmentionable word. And unfortunately, it still got nowhere. And the official stance was the implementation was too difficult. And they also specified, well, the peak to average ratio is too high, and we can't do anything like that. We need all these fancy solutions. Turned out you really didn't, but everybody went off and studied that to try to overcome that problem. The truth was the time wasn't right. And there was a lot of economic and political considerations that I just, at the time, did not understand. And I learned by being in these meetings and seeing how they worked. But another failure, on my part at least. Then AT&T split with Lucent. Well, now we didn't have a Wi-Fi interest any longer in AT&T. And so what are we going to work on? Who knew exactly? But AT&T merged or bought Paul Cellular in 1994. So that means we're suddenly back in the cellular business. And so we got together. Nelson Salenberger happened to be my boss at that time, became my boss, and we proposed something together with Sony for TIA, which is the Telecommunications Industry Association, I think, for what was called INT 2000, think 3G. And of course, we thought this was the best proposal again, but it failed, and it really got very little consideration. What happened is WCA, wideband CDMA, was chosen very quickly and pushed through for 3G, and most people know that's what was used. Okay. So you consider it another failure, and this happened all the time in my career. Everything I would ever work on never really went anywhere. And we kept working and pushing, but it didn't go anywhere. I even gave tutorials on OFDM and with Geoffrey and other people, and never went anywhere. At least in terms of my influencing a standard or anything like that. But I always thought, and so did most of the people I worked with, that OFDM was the best solution. It was going to help us overcome this limit that was caused by delays. And so I can keep talking about failures we had for all kinds of reasons, with myself, my colleagues, AT&T in general. But over time, through the efforts of a lot of other people, research developers, systems engineers, OFDM, as we don't know what's proposed. I know that OFDM has been very flexible, has provided a lot of flexibility. Because of its capability for overcoming this delay spread limit, it gives us a foundation that we can build on. And then, like Steve was mentioning, OFDMA, and the way it's implemented in all its variants, make it very flexible. So I have a feeling that this will continue for future generations and in cellular and Wi-Fi. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, so that's it. And so what I wanted to do was start, here's a picture from Stanford, 1991. And here's people which I met, John, he's back there. So there's John Chaffee. That's me when I was young. And there's a bunch of folks here. Pete Chow. Oh, Rob Siegler was in wireless. He didn't do OFDM, but he's been at Belcourt which turned into Peraton, so he's still there. And a bunch of other folks. So John had three groups. One was wireless, one was DMT, DSL, so the DMT was discrete multi-tone modulation, which is OFDM, and disk drives. So I was in the wireless group with Rob, and a bunch of these people were doing DMT. And so it was sort of in the air, right? I kind of knew what DMT was, but I was working in wireless. I think at this time I'm still playing with CDMA. But what was happening was these guys, Jerry Tu, who was sitting next to me during the 1989 earthquake, and Jackie Chow, and John, and Pete, and Jerry, and John. So there were more papers than this, but these are two seminal papers. We're using OFDM for DSL. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it being used in the Telebit Trailblazer also?
It was.
I love my 19.5 Telebit Trailblazer.
The first commercial one was actually called with Kinoplex in 1957, but the Collins doesn't get a lot of credit because everything was secret in government, so even before then.
Okay, so here's DSL, and one of the things about DSL is a wired transmission. So the channel is static, right? So you have one user to one user, transmitter to receiver, wire. Now, one of the things about OFDM, as you all know, is that if you have a frequency selective channel, you're going to have peaks and dips. In a static channel, you can take care of that through bit loading and power loading. But in a wireless channel, everybody was sort of going, I don't know, wireless channel, frequency selective channel, you're going to have highs and lows, what the heck are you going to do? Now, in Len's paper, and Len says he doesn't remember this, but I remember calling him when I was in grad school asking about his paper. And he's saying, now in my paper, we have a fast fading channel, and we're going to use the fast fading to get diversity. And he said, imagine me, I'm spinning around in my office chair. So I had this vision of Len spinning around in his office chair. And so even if you had dips, the channel was changing so fast, you could get diversity. So it was an interesting idea, but this idea of peaks and dips was kind of scary. And then I think John gave me this paper to read. And this is the digital audio broadcast paper. And it's by Raoul Castellane and Lefloc. Lefloc?
That's right.
Pardon my French.
Yes.
So what this paper did was it talked about broadcast transmission in a wireless frequency selective channel. And it used coding to correct for the peaks and the dips. So you coded across the tones so that you didn't have to worry about the peaks and the dips anymore. To me, this was revolutionary. This is very cool. It's like, this is how you can do it in a channel that's not static, that's changing, and you can use error control coding. I sort of think of it as like a socialist system. The strong tones are helping the weak tones. I think that's a product of my living in Sweden for a few years, which was a successful socialist country. So, I did, after I graduated, got my PhD, I went to Sweden, and this is Luleå, which is 60 miles south of the Arctic Circle, in I think around 1995. So I hung around in the north of Sweden off and on from 95 to 99. And I was full-time there for the last 2 years. And Len can remember I used to call him at 2 o'clock in the afternoon saying, Len, it's dark. Or I don't know, I emailed. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
So anyway, this is Uwe Edforsch, Magnus Sandell, Jan-Jaap van de Beek, Håkan Björkgren, Harold Laboriusen, Gerrit Lidling, Anders, a bunch of folks. And what we did was we worked on OFDM. We had a cooperation with Telia. Telia was the Swedish phone company. And Telia was very interested in OFDM for cellular. So we wrote a paper, and it took us, we worked on that paper for like 2 years, because we were just sort of like nervous. I think we were all, I was nervous about it. And it was singular value channel estimation by singular value decomposition in OFDM. And it did well. So it was a really cool group of guys to work with, very, very smart guys. And I always felt like working with these guys was like being part of the Beatles. You know, it's like individually we were okay, but together we were really good. So the summary is with OFDM, it's a static channel with a static channel DSL water filling, wireless broadcast, no water filling, solved by coding across the tones. Then for cellular, so you know, you've got DSL one-to-one, you've got digital audio broadcast one-to-many, but multi-user. How do you separate the users? How to use the time frequency grid? So this is an ETSI proposal, European Telecommunications Standards Institute proposal from 1997 from Telia. And this is, Telia worked with Sony on the 3G proposal. This is part of the 3G proposal, which nobody voted for. Even Telia didn't vote for it. And my friends at Telia said, well, how many people are working on CDMA in the world? Thousands. How many people are working on OFDM right now? Hundreds. You know, so doesn't make sense. We'll do it later. But this was their proposal. And what we have here in the proposal is the time frequency grid. Has anybody seen this before? Do you see it in 4G and in 5G? So this was proposed by, and a lot of the guys who worked on this proposal were Jaap van de Beek and Uwe Edforsch and Magnus Sandell. So, and Matthias Wahlquist, who's now working in Spain for Spanish Telecom. No, for Ericsson in Spain. So I love this photo. I love this image because everybody thinks, oh, it came along in 4G. But how many of you before today, raise your hands, how many of you before today knew it was one of the 3 proposals for 3G? Okay, well, it was one of the 3 proposals for 3G. And so this was part of it. And that's pretty much all I had to say. Thanks a lot, Katie.
In line is Hikmet. So he's going to continue with the European perspective because Katie already started with it, and I think you were probably working more or less at the same time in similar things, or I don't know, but it's going to be interesting to hear.
Right, thank you very much, Anna, for organizing this panel and inviting me. My story, I'm impressed by what I was hearing. My story is a little shorter anyway. And contrary to what my colleagues here, they had projects, they worked maybe quite a long time on OFDM and other things. My involvement was basically, it's like a hobby, personal curiosity. You don't have to do it for your job, because for those who don't know me, I was 25 years of my career was in industry, but in industry where I was not involved really in OFDM. So that's an interesting story on OFDM, OFDMA, single carrier transmission with frequency domain equalization. So what happened? What I did? Oops.
So back in 1980s, this was mentioned several times. I'm European, living in France, and I know in this period there was a lot of excitement. Digital TV, digital broadcasting, and when we say digital, it's digital satellite, digital cable TV, digital terrestrial. And the biggest amount of energy was really digital terrestrial. This is where the challenge was. This is true for administrations and companies spending millions in European projects. So I looked at OFDM, as I said. This was not my project. I was not involved in it. I was doing digital microwave radio in my company. But I was just reading papers and then getting curious about what was being said. Is this true? Is it hype? What is it? So by many at the time, let me say, OFDM is one thing, and the OFDM literature at that time another. Maybe I was criticizing the literature because the OFDM was perceived as the sole technology that can really cope if you have digital terrestrial TV broadcasting and you're in a car moving, you want to have good receptions. And many were claiming just there is no other way, it has to go OFDM, nothing else. So as I said, I'm an outsider. I just took a quick look. I was intrigued because, what is it? How does it work? And why is it the only solution? So this brought me to write a paper, a conference paper, and that was in 1993, Tirrenia. Tirrenia is near Pisa in Italy. And you see the title here, channel equalization and synchronization in OFDM. I made a critical review. I mean, what does OFDM offer? What are the problems? And I was looking at both ways. So let me see. The paper reviewed again OFDM, highlighted the good features, also pointed out the problems. And in the literature, you see the green. I mean, a lot of people, they were just telling a lot of things about OFDM, and OFDM suppresses the need for channel equalization. Well, I said, why? How come? This is magic. Well, I just explained in that paper that it does not suppress it. It just transforms it from the time domain to the frequency domain, because people doing channel equalization at that time, selective fading and wireless channels. The usual way was, linear equalization, decision feedback. It's all time domain processing. And when you have OFDM, you have the frequency dimension. Actually, it's subcarrier by subcarrier. When you have a linear, convolution in the time domain, it's a multiplication point by point in the frequency domain. And then OFDM creates frequency diversity. I said, how does it do it? Well, it looked exactly the opposite to me, because if you have a 5 megahertz channel, like TV channel, in single carrier, when you transmit a signal, the signal energy goes in 5 megahertz. You have the whole bandwidth. When you split it, if you take a 1K DFT to transmit an OFDM, well, now one particular symbol is transmitted not in 5 megahertz, but in 5 kilohertz, which means no diversity. And if you have a frequency selectivity here in this, this kills this symbol, right? This is why you mentioned the DAB, DVB projects in Europe and colleagues who worked on it. They worked on, of course, they coupled OFDM with coding and interleaving. You had to do coding so that you protect the symbols transmitted at very highly attenuated frequencies using the energy of the other. I mean, so this was coded. The almost published papers say coded COFDM, it was not OFDM. And OFDM is more spectral efficient. This is, in single carrier we have we lose some efficiency, bandwidth efficiency, because Nyquist filtering, you have the role of factor and so on. But in OFDM again, you have to use zero carriers on both sides. We call them virtual carriers, so it's the same. Anyway, I was saying this alone. A lot of people were not happy because they were trying to sell OFDM. And the reaction was, at this conference, I remember it was very strong. And some people here know Jim Modestino, very big name at the time, right? He was sitting next to me, he said, Hikmet, you're attacking religion. You know what they do to people who attack religion? Be careful, they burn them. So this was, so I just clarified all those issues about the OFDM, and I proposed single carrier transmission with frequent manipulation. This is when I proposed it as an alternative technique. And the most well-known paper is this in Communication Magazine. Basically took the Terrania paper, the content, and added more, and it's a magazine paper. So this was published in February '95. Now, this is about OFDM itself. Now, I titled this slide to Road to OFDMA. So what happened in the DAB, DVB projects, in the DVB project, let's say, again, in satellite cable terrestrial, the DVB project adopted OFDM in the end for terrestrial broadcasting, but they chose, of course, for satellite and cable TV, they just used plain old QAM, single carrier. So at that time we had no internet, right? People, when you do broadcasting, it's one way, and then they started discussing about interactivity. Oh, I get a TV signal, but I want to have services like pay-per-view, pay-per-view, video on demand, this kind of thing. So when you look at the return channel, it's low data rate basically. So the question was, what do we do? And a lot of people, as it was mentioned earlier, everyone knows TDMA, so everything was about TDMA. And in this group, I was involved again, almost as an outsider. I was in this group, and I proposed something like, it's an OFDMA, but an OFDMA in which each user gets, let's say, one single carrier. You have a cable head end, for the cable transmission, like broadcasting. You assign one carrier to each user. In that case, you have no peak to average power issue because what you're transmitting is a single carrier. But what is received by the head end is a DFT because those carriers are not just randomly fluctuating. They are perfectly synchronized, just like in a DFT, okay? And the demodulator is an OFDM demodulator. So, why was this? I mean, this seemed to me really the best, maybe the solution for that problem at hand, because those who know cable networks, you have in those networks narrowband interference when you look at the uplink channel, and if the head end assigns carriers to users, the head end also knows where you have pollution, where you have a lot of interference, narrowband interference. So you just don't allocate those frequencies to users. And when you look at this, you analyze it. OFDMA, conceived in this way, is much more robust than TDMA and CDMA, because in TDMA, even CDMA, the narrowband interference energy is there. You have to live with it somehow. Okay. But anyway, this was not accepted. Later on, they adopted it, and this went into other types of systems. But look at this. I mean, OFDMA, again, based on those analyses, very simple analyses, we published a number of papers. And my first paper on OFDMA was in '96, which means I was doing this in '94, '95. This will be difficult to find. ICT is a very small conference, not many people know about it, but basically this was followed by another paper which came out in '97, and here we introduced like frequency hopping and other things. So we moved on and developed this OFDMA. You can see journal publication here in '98. What happened, I was also involved in another company. By that time I was transferred to another company, and I was involved in IEEE 802.16. They were working on metropolitan area networks and fixed services and mobile services. So what happened is funny because this group did a lot of work. In the end, they did not agree because they had different proposals. OFDM like Wi-Fi at that time, TDMA, or OFDMA, where you also include the frequency dimension and resource allocation, and also single carrier, and everything was in it. So for fixed services, they had options, 3 options. So that's IEEE, but there is also the WiMAX forum, the forum which developed the specifications, technical specifications. They based their standard on OFDM TDMA, not OFDMA. Then they started working on mobile reception, and for mobile WiMAX, this time they included OFDMA was in the specifications. So the first OFDMA before other systems, it was OFDMA came out in mobile WiMAX. 3GPP, of course, as you know, 3GPP killed WiMAX, fixed mobile and everything. But basically, when they started working on LTE and later on LTE advanced, they followed WiMAX to a large extent, mobile WiMAX. But in the end, so they chose OFDMA for the downlink, but on the uplink, because OFDMA has a high peak to average power ratio, they went to another sort of cousin technology, we call single carrier FDMA, which overcomes this. This is 4G, I mean LTE advanced and everything. And then later on, maybe 2010, 12, I don't remember exactly, it was, they started to work on 5G. And in 5G, we heard a lot about NOMA. Today people, it becomes a sort of trendy fashion. NOMA will kill OFDMA, NOMA is better than OFDMA and everything. It didn't make it. NOMA for 5G did not. So it is still OFDMA. OFDMA went for 4G. It was a breakthrough. It continued in 5G. And now my the question, the way I see it, it's interesting. Again, NOMA is being pushed for 6G. A lot of people get excited about NOMA and different variants, including rate splitting multiplexers and other things. But this is presented as competing technology somehow to, let's say, kill OFDMA. I view it another way because, interesting, everything you hear about NOMA started in 2013, all the publications I see. And they're all based on one strong signal, one low signal. You have interference cancellation, blah, blah, blah. So, in the power domain, NOMA. And many people don't know it because this is not really referenced in the NOMA literature. I published NOMA papers in the year 2000. It is simply by taking two sets of orthogonal signal waveforms. You take TDMA, you can take CDMA. You can take two orthogonal waveforms, and then, of course, when you allocate resources from one of these sets, the signals are orthogonal. The other set, they are orthogonal, but they're not orthogonal mutually. We recently, when I saw all these publications on NOMA and everything, we revived this concept back in 2018, and this is the paper here I mentioned, and the title you see, specifically frequency domain NOMA, using two sets of orthogonal signal waveforms. So why is it interesting? Because it is OFDMA plus multicarrier CDMA. Both of them are frequency, because it's in the frequency domain. It is not, I would say, competing technology to OFDMA. It's a natural extension. It's an evolution. Because if you have n carriers, suppose each user requires a capacity of one carrier, then you can allocate resources to n users. When you have more users, you start piling up other waveforms from MCCDMA. So now you have spreading in the frequency domain. So people interested, they can look at this paper to see what the concept is. It is evolution of FDMA in the normal world. That's all I have to say today. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much. And then you introduced actually our next speaker because you started to talk about what is next, right? And to talk about what is next, we don't really know if next is really OFDM or what exactly, but I believe it's probably some kind of multicarrier modulation. And then, let me see if we can see this. Great. And then we have Jinhong to give us a little bit his view about what is next.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and thank you for your kind invitation. Also, thank you the pioneers who are in the panel and sitting here, and I really learned a lot of and in a short period of time. Although my first OFDM multi-carrier is from textbook, from reading the papers. But I don't have a story yet. And what I would like to share is how I learned this multi-carrier modulation, a kind of evolution in last, say, 6 to 7 years. So say the multi-carrier modulation from a time frequency domain to the delayed Doppler domain. So we have heard a lot of successful stories on multi-carrier modulation, particularly on OFDM, and Kate shows the grade. I have this time frequency grade, typical OFDM, and also I think Stephen showed the spectrum, and I should, yeah, to have that to echo. And it is very successful because we have seen it in Wi-Fi, in DVD, and all of the panel mentioned as well, and ADSL. So that is good for static channel, means the channel does not change too much. You only have a multipass delay, you don't have much Doppler. If we move forward, say, if we shoot in future applications, we have a time variant channel, the channel is changing faster. If we look at the time frequency domain, channel is kind of messy, and particularly for high Doppler environment. So you need resources to do the channel estimation. You also need to frequently to do this. So that is if you look at the time frequency domain. Alternatively, if you look at the delayed Doppler domain, the channel can be represented by a few parameters like the number of passes and the amplitude, the delay, and the Doppler. And it is a kind of compact, sparse, stable. So if we can estimate the channel in the delayed Doppler domain, it allows to low complexity and less resources, probably more reliable, hopefully. That means there might be, from the channel point of view, kind of an evolution. Look at the coherence time or coherence bandwidth in the time frequency domain to the delayed Doppler domain. Look at the stationary time. Means in the stationary time, your delayed Doppler does not change too much. Give me a simple example. If I'm driving a car 120 kilometers per hour, and I'm talking to the roadside transmitter, the coherence time typically 2.5 milliseconds. That's our frame length is much smaller than that one. But if you look at the delayed Doppler domain, the stationary time could be 10 times higher than the coherence time. Means if we look at the delayed Doppler domain, the channel remains kind of stable there. If we can estimate the channel in that period of time, this gives us a little bit extra. That is how delayed Doppler domain from the channel point of view. So motivated by this delayed Doppler domain channel and inspired by these successful stories, multi-carrier modulation, particularly OFDM, we can go beyond from the time frequency grade to the delayed Doppler grade in multi-carrier modulation. Particularly, we explore the doubly selective channel or time variant channel, and hopefully it is possible to support the future and integrate the sensing and the communication. So delayed Doppler modulation was again introduced by Ronnie Hadani and Shlomo and Andrew Goldsmith and Hikmet, and each of them has successful stories as well. And it was in 2017. It's very exciting. So we started to look at this delayed Doppler domain. They call it the orthogonal time frequency space modulation. We look at this, the essence of this modulation. Basically, it carries information in the delayed Doppler domain. It means in the delayed Doppler grade, I think Kate has a kind of a grade, but that refers to the time frequency grade. You have this large grade. If you have the given the system bandwidth and the frame duration, you ideally have this delayed Doppler resolution. You are able to see the signal in the fine grade, which is a delay grade. The fine frequency grade is a Doppler grade. That's what we have here, a little bit fine grade. So if we can carry the information in the delayed Doppler grade, then couple the information to the channel. So hopefully you are able to, each information symbol is repeated in the time domain and the frequency domain. Naturally, you have this time frequency diversity. You can come back or explore the diversity, get more reliability. So the thing is delay Doppler modulation, and you need to make sure the symbol duration must be less than the stationary time. Given the stationary time is most likely 10 times the coherence time, so that gives you a different frame structure. So now how do we do this? And I mean, I'm motivated by this OTFS, but when we look at this OTFS, the essential part is you change the signal from the Doppler to the time. So that is the inverse DFT. So when I look at that, that's naturally a multi-carrier modulation, just like you change it from a fixed domain to time domain. But say for each multi-carrier modulation, we need kind of a pulse. So we started design the pulse. What is the pulse which enable the signal in the fine grid carried in the fine grid match to the delay Doppler grid? So we need a kind of a pulse. So we revisit this OFDM modulation. Say if we have this time fixed grid, time resolution T, fixed grid resolution F, we have this also analytic condition. Assume we have 3 subcarriers. In OFDM, typically we have one multi-carrier symbol with M subcarriers. If we want to pack N symbols, what we do is one after another, cascading. Obviously, you probably in real system, you add CG. So that is what we do here. But if we look at the delay Doppler domain, assume we can design a multi-carrier modulation matched to the fine grid, fine than the time frequency grid. We need a pulse or prototype pulse which are orthogonal to the delay Doppler grid. So, I mean, if the symbol duration, frame length is nt, the Doppler resolution is 1 over nt. That means we can have a multi-carrier modulation with this frequency resolution. But what we need to do is a prototype pulse. If we have n equal to 6 subcarriers, we have this prototype pulse. It's different from the conventional rectangular pulse, which guided our multi-carrier modulation. That's a little bit different from the convention. What effectively means each symbol modulated by this multi-carrier modulation is repeated multiple times in this small grid. That's why you have this diversity. So that is one multi-carrier modulation. So you see this one multi-carrier modulation. Between these symbol durations, you have a gap. If you use the root raised cosine pulse, and you guide the width of the root raised cosine pulse, you can pack multiple multi-carrier modulations. So effectively, you have the total resources, but fine resolution between them, and the same number of symbols you pack, but just different. So that is similar to multi-tone modulation in earlies, but stacked. The first multi-carrier modulation haven't finished, you stack the second multi-carrier modulation, etc. So that is what we do, and in last couple of years, together with the community in the delay Doppler domain. So final words is the delay Doppler domain give probably another evolution on multi-carrier modulation, and still satisfy the conventional multi-carrier modulation principles. Just we need to have different pulse. And there are many opportunities here, and as long as we have orthogonal pulse with respect to the channel delay Doppler grid, we can have a low complexity channel estimation, because you are estimating the channel in the delay as long as you know the delay and the Doppler, you know the channel in the time frequency domain. And furthermore, and integrated sensing and communication, and we are able to do a high resolution sensing. The reason is the symbol duration is much longer, and the pulse, probably people working on radar, you will see that looks like a pulse radar. Actually, the fundamental pulse is just a pulse radar. So you easily doing communication, use a multi-carrier, use the pulse to do sensing. And explore the channel diversity and the low complexity digital implementations for the transmitter and the receiver. So looking forward to 6G in the future, and given the most of 6G still associated with low mobility environment, and probably OFDM may still drive the bulk of the 6G. We don't know. But in certain situations, if you can accommodate the fine grade, the OTFS or ODDM can coexist. Give me the resources, I'm able to find the grade matched to one. They do not interfere with each other. So I think that is very important and also give flexibility. For certain special cases, say if you have a really high Doppler frequency, for example, high mobility case, satellite and or underwater system, multicarrier modulation with delayed Doppler resolutions may find other potential applications. I think for 3GPP is talking about radio frequency sensing and beam prediction. If we work on the delayed Doppler domain, given this multi-carrier signal, we probably can do beam prediction and using the uplink. Temperature domain, if you want to use the uplink downlink produce, it probably a little bit problematic. But delayed Doppler, because you have this longer stationary time, the uplink channel, downlink channel, probably you can predict a little bit. That's mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I hope you are enjoying as much as I am. And now we have a little bit of time for questions. I see a hand over there.
So given that OFDM was proposed for 3G, then what was the main technical reason that it was not selected? And then what happened from like 3G to 4G that suddenly like OFDM was so popular?
Would you like me to take a shot at that?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever anybody mentions OFDM, or at least back in those days, they'd say, oh, the peak to average power ratio. Oh, the peak to average power ratio. They would get really upset about it. Is Len agreeing with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. So then the other thing was, as I said, just two people. Even though it's an old technology, it was still relatively new. So John had shown it for DSL, for static channel, but for wireless, for cellular, it was too new. And there were too few people working on it, was what I was told by the folks at Talia, who actually had a vote and voted no against their own proposal. So does that make sense?
And how about for 4G?
Well, for 4G, it's, it's single carrier, it's that fancy, it's OFDM in one direction and single carrier FDMA in the other.
Yeah.
And single carrier FDMA was to get rid of the peak to average power ratio. So that's how they got around it. It's sort of like the gateway drug, I guess, SCFDMA. It gets you into OFDM without.
I think because MIMO, OFDM is so easy to implement with MIMO. And that's the main driver.
But
to
MIMO
implement
came a bit
OFDM.
late. I would say
It's
MIMO came a
very
bit later.
2D rate receiver is very complex to implement.
But the question is why magically, he was asking, why magically OFDM became the solution in 4G and it was not in 3G?
Even though 3G, okay, so this is my theory. Everybody knows this. Every time when 3G got voted on in 1997 when they had the bake-off and they voted for, they didn't have a bake-off, but they voted for it, it's like immediately people start talking about 4G. And then there's all these people who worked on OFDM who said, this is our chance. What do you think, Glenn?
Makes sense. I mean, a lot of times it's about timing, and it's about what companies have invested in a particular technology.
Yep.
And so they want to keep pushing whatever they're invested in at the time, what they're ready for. 3G with wideband CDMA is the clearest example. They were in a big hurry. Lots of it had to do with licensing and some other things, but that's what happens. It's not always the technology that's might be best, but it's what's right at the time. And that's what you have to fight all the time. And when you work for a company that doesn't have that product at that point in time, the technology just stops. The research on that topic stops. I think I answered. I couldn't hear the question completely.
There is a question over there.
So I have a comment on 3G and a couple of questions. The comment on 3G is that probably a couple of North European companies were very strong when 3G has been, let's say, developed. And the success of 4G is not only technical, but because the popularity of those companies fall down the years, so they have not so much power. Yeah?
Yeah.
So, regarding my questions, the first one is on the history. What about cyclic graphics, as this colleague before mentioned, and also bit loading procedures? Because one of the first work on bit loading was by Robert Gallagher in 1968 about water cooling outlet that is used and changing the water flow. So, what is the, let's say, the parts of the story related to bit loading? And about the future, in this different kind of description on delay and Doppler, it works in my opinion, but there's a question. Because, let's say, you have movement by devices, by the Doppler is really limited because the changing in speed with respect to the observation time is very small.
Oh, I'm going to take it real quick. Tony Ruiz, I think it was Tony Ruiz wrote the first paper that explicitly mentioned cyclic prefix, though.
Ruiz and Perez.
Ruiz and Perez, though I think that it's implicitly mentioned in Steve's paper, even though he doesn't remember.
I think, but who were Ruiz and Perez? I know the paper, but
John knows Tony
with John,
Ruiz.
right? They were in your group somehow.
He was your group, one of your group?
Well, they did that work at IBM, and Tony, who's actually older than me, but he wound up being my student. I worked at IBM, and so he came and worked with me, but they'd already done the work at IBM on the cyclic prefix, and then he, started another project with the other students to try to do water filling and get the optimum spectrum for almost fixed channels. But water filling, I should correct, it's in Shannon's paper. So
Yeah.
we're just doing what Shannon told us to do.
So he's the guy for the loading
Yeah, I
and water
know.
filling.
I mentioned in my paper several times.
And then we have the question about the delay Doppler, right?
Yeah, I think for delayed Doppler, and if your mobility is small, probably there's not much advantage to go to the delayed Doppler or domain multi-carrier modulation. But if the mobility is high and you have this time diversity by using the longer the delayed Doppler multi-carrier modulation, you can explore the diversity there. But I would also like to say OTFS or OFDM is a combination of single carrier and multi-carrier. If you take a look at the Doppler domain, it's a multi-carrier. But if you take a look at the delay domain, it's a single carrier. Because your signal is modulated, the delay Doppler to your transmitted signal is a time delay domain. Delay to delay does not change, so still the single carrier. But Doppler to time is a multi-carrier.
Okay, I think we need to finish. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I think we have here a family of people that are passionate about the technology that it took a lot of time to develop, and I think it has a lot of future as well. And I want to thank, of course, all the panelists for being here and all the audience, and have a nice day.
May I add a comment? There is an interesting paper by Anna related to the signal-to-noise ratio gap approximation when you have to optimize constellation and take also into account for the reliability of the link.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you know where I was when I prepared that paper? I was with John, visiting him in Stanford. And then I learned about all this SNR gap and all these things. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the conference.